You're listening to Feel Good Astrology with Louisa Tanner Munson. To request a personal reading with Louisa, go to www.feelgoodastrology.com.
Hi, this is Louisa Tanner Munson, and this is a continuation of the Chiron series. So, previously we've learnt a little bit about what Chiron represents, and Chiron is known as the wounded healer. We've come to understand as well that Chiron represents a wounding that we can't always manage to get over. And if you think of the story of Chiron, it's very much about having to live with the almost like immortal pain of a wounding that we can't shift. And the way that Chiron in old mythology resolves it is that he completely accepts the situation as is and decides to work with the pain rather than fight it. So Chiron, first of all, in our birth charts, shows us where our wounding is and offers us suggestions as to how we can overcome the wounding based on our cosmic coding represented by our birth chart. So when I'm looking at the birth charts of clients and family and friends, and obviously myself, when I'm looking at the position of Chiron, I will first of all identify which house Chiron's in. I'm not so worried about the actual sign that Chiron's in, because for some people Chiron will be in that sign for 8 years. For instance, my Chiron's in Aries, and it was in Aries for a good 8-9 years back when I was born, and it's not going to really change its actual real sort of expression too much. But where it is in the actual wheel of your zodiac, like which house it's in, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, all the way up to the 12th house, really describes how Chiron expresses himself within your chart. So that's the first thing I really look at primarily, because the actual star sign itself shows more of a generational Chironic effect. So the house is the most particular thing. And then I look at the number of difficult aspects that Chiron has to other planets within your birth chart, especially really tight ones. And the ones that I've noticed that are the most pertinent and the most difficult ones to get over are the oppositions and squares, and sometimes the conjunctions. Now, I've been obviously using Chiron for about 7 or 8 years in my own astrology interpretations for people. And I've also noticed, so where Chiron lies in your actual chart really represents where your wounding is and how you can get over it, and also whether you will get over it or not. Because for some people, they're quite happy to stay in their wounding because I think it's better the devil you know or not. And by analysing your Chiron in your chart, you get a really good clue as to whether you'll overcome it or not. And I'll explain some of those steps as we go through this. But the other thing that I really noticed about Chiron is when Chiron is aspecting an important planet in your birth chart. So like traveling Chiron, like transiting Chiron that's moving around all the time, or another planet, a major planet, for instance, Pluto or Saturn or Uranus or Neptune, one of the outer ones really. If something is aspecting your natal Chiron, then the themes of Chiron come up. And so the themes of your wounding come up, but there's often clues as to how you can get through it. So I'm really, really interested in the position in your birth chart and how that can help you. And I'm also really interested when Chiron transits are coming up, which shows a movement and a motion of healing that's about to happen for you. So I'm going to cover both of those. In this actual podcast, I'm just going to talk about its effect in your birth chart, and I will cover the transiting forms of Chiron at a later date. But that is fascinating. My whole life changed when Chiron went over the parts of my IC, and I'll explain that in a very separate podcast because it's actually quite immense, and I think of interest to most people. So how does it affect you in your chart? So the things that I've noticed from looking at some of my clients who have got through wounding, and those who really struggle with sort of mental illness and parental wounding and an ongoing sort of malaise that they can't quite push through, and also illness that they can't push through, sort of mysterious things that can't be worked through. I've had a look at a load of those charts from my clients, and obviously I'm not going to mention who they are, but I just want to illustrate a few things. So the difficulty for people that I see coming up in some of my repeat clients, and like I said, some of my most wounded clients, are people who have really strong oppositions to their natal Chiron. Now, what an opposition does is challenge the expression of Chiron, and sometimes shut it up, or sometimes it's like being on a seesaw. The Chiron side is up sometimes, and the opposing planet is down the other time, and then it might shift. So when the Chiron planet is up, it's free to express its wild, wounding nature. It's free to express its pain. It's free to express its misery. And then when that Chiron planet goes down and the opposing planet is up, whatever that opposing planet represents is the thing that comes to fore. So, for instance, what I've seen in quite a few charts just this morning that I've been looking through is a Chiron-Uranus opposition. And the reactions that I've seen in my clients with this particular cosmic coding is that sometimes they'll be wildly in pain and really, really suffering and finding life very, very tricky and being very open about what they're going through. And it's very clear that everyone can see that they're going through something very, very difficult and profound. And people will try and help them, and they'll almost get absorbed into the matrix of caring for the Chiron wounding as it's happening. And then when the Chiron seesaw, the opposition, goes down and the Uranus side is more prominent, then all of a sudden you don't see this person ever again. They disappear and they cut off. So people I've seen with a really strong Chiron-Uranus opposition or square have this very on-off quality in their relationships. In particular, bearing in mind that Chiron often represents our childhood wounds, in particular with a parent. So this has come up in the charts of several people who have parental issues based on the fact that one of the parents either left the family home during their infancy, or that one of the parents died quite suddenly. And I've seen that in a range of birth charts today. The trickiest one is the opposition, because it doesn't seem to really let off any steam. I've seen quite a few people with Chiron-Saturn squares, not so much the oppositions, but the Saturn squares. In fact, I've got one myself. And Chiron's expression here is a bit more tricky, because Saturn is about restriction, and Saturn is about keeping things under control and trying to be measured about the way you do things. And the square aspect between Chiron and Saturn almost makes the person tight-lipped when they're going through pain. So when people are in a place of deep pain, the childhood pain and misery that we all go through from time to time, especially when we're triggered and we're projecting, these people tend to go underground. So they don't actually want to have any real help. They don't really want any sympathy. And in fact, when they do get the sympathy, they find it very difficult and almost feel unworthy of having the sympathy. So the Chiron and Saturn energy, the person almost has a defeatist attitude about resolving their childhood pain and don't want to talk about it, don't want to share about it, and feel almost guilty for expressing it. Saturn's very good at laying guilt on people. And there are guilt throwers and guilt catchers. And I think people with a strong Saturn-Chiron thing going on have a very good ability to throw guilt at people, but also catch it. So they're very wary of being very open about their pain. Other ones that I've seen, and this is also due to a lot of the people that I've had as clients recently, a lot of them have been through their Chiron return very recently. And what this means is the Chiron return happens when Chiron goes back to its birthplace. the place that it was in the exact moment when you were born. The Chiron return happens between the ages of 50 and 51, approximately. So these people that I've seen in the last few years or so, a lot of them are born around 1964 to 1967. Now, during that time, there was a very particular astrological setup where Chiron was conjunct Saturn and in opposition to Pluto and Uranus. Now, Saturn wasn't always there. It was mainly there in, I think, 1966. 1965 to 1966, and it got more and more tight in the early part of 1966, I believe, off the top of my head. But the Pluto-Uranus opposition to Chiron is the most particular thing, because Pluto represents transformation and Uranus represents freedom and liberation. So if you imagine the energies of Pluto, like dark transformation coming through liberation and freedom, in opposition to childhood pain. And I think what we've got here is one of the first main generations of people who came from divorced parents and who also got divorced or left partners and found other partners and had a series. I've met lots of people around that time who have had very strong, quick relationships that form and then break down quite quickly and quite suddenly and quite irrevocably, but there's no coming back from it. So it's a very, very strong pattern, and a bit like what I said at the start, the Chiron versus Uranus opposition, where Chiron is like, look at my pain, and then the Uranus thing comes up. Sorry, I'm losing my voice, and everyone's, the person has disappeared. With Pluto as well, you've got this almost pathological need to stay away from your pain. So the thing that caused you the pain, you don't go anywhere near it, and you want freedom from it. So if the pain that you had at childhood gets projected onto an ex-partner, it makes having a relationship with your ex-partner very, very difficult, because you're just associating them with the pain, and that person will run away from it. So on the one hand, it sounds like a recipe for immaturity, but not so. It's just a recipe that these people have had their pain brought back to life, thanks to their cosmic coding again and again and again and again. They were born at a very difficult time, I have to say. Other things that have come up as to tricky Chiron planetary energy is the conjunction with the sun or the conjunction with the moon. I do know one person whose moon is exactly conjunct Chiron, like exactly to the very, very second. And it's a very, very difficult, almost like an unknown pain to understand when Chiron is so connected so tightly to the moon. The moon often represents our mother. So if you're thinking about childhood pain, you might assume it has something to do with the mother. But here, there's almost a level of unconsciousness that the pain is so big and so vast. If you think about the moon and its influence and its mysteriousness, that it makes the pain very difficult to actually grab onto and articulate and understand. And with that comes the confusion as to how do I get over it. And then, with Chiron conjunct the sun, that makes the personality that I've observed in clients, it makes the personality all about healing and all about the pain, and that the life becomes the mission. So that's some of the themes of the trickiness. Where when I look at people's Chiron templates, I also look at where there's ease, so where there's easy aspects. And the ones that I've seen in people who've had a hard Chiron wicket but managed to get over it are the ones that also have quite a few easy aspects. And one of the things that I find very easy in the Chiron aspects, and it's no surprise that I've seen it in my clients, because if you have to think about the types of clients that might come and see an astrologer in the first place, they're usually people who have an understanding of astrology, who have an understanding of pain and transference and psychology. They're also usually people who are interested in upgrading their lives and making things work for them and transcending anything that is no longer a good representation of themselves. So these are people that want to progress and shift and change the way they're going to live. Now, I can think of 4 or 5 healers from my database of clients who have Chiron in a really good aspect to the sun. So they have tough Chiron aspects from childhood that make them identify with pain, sometimes with illness. It's not always about childhood psychological pain. It is sometimes about actual illness. And I can share my own experiences here. But I won't bore you with that at this one. But Chiron, they have a tough Chiron coding, but they also have this ease which comes in. And the trine to the sun, the trine to the midheaven have come up in the charts of people who I know to be healers, therapists, doctors, and people who look at making people well again, and people who want to make themselves whole, who believe in a wholesome kind of identity and way of being. And I'm one of them. My Chiron is in a grand trine with my midheaven and my sun. So that's my own experience. My husband also has this, and it's not really surprising that he spent his whole life up until very recently working on new age activities and running a new age radio show, magazines and things like that. So, you know, there is this need to help, advise and take the pain but make it into something useful. Other ones that I've seen a certain amount of grace and serenity from the Chiron is the trine to Neptune and to Jupiter. So any kind of Jupiter and Neptune is actually, I think, quite helpful in a trine position, because Neptune is a planet to do with transcendence and the unconscious mind, and it's a bit like an ocean. You know, it goes really, really deep, and you never know what you're going to find. It's about creativity. But in the trine, it really helps to let your pain out, and it really helps you to understand pain in a really creative way. And in particular, healers that use art and music and sound and energetic, like Reiki type healing, I've seen that come up in their charts. Or people that use music and photography as a healing part of the process, again, it's come up, especially if the Neptune is on the ascendant or in the midheaven. So I think the positions of Chiron are absolutely critical. So like I said, the charts that I've seen that make Chiron work for them are the ones who have almost accepted that the difficult aspects just represent something of the past. They represent something that it is what it is. You know, there's nothing you can do. You can't change the past. You can't change any psychological wounding you've had or any physical wounding that you may have had. There's nothing you can do about that, but you can change your perception. So where people take the healing and do something with it and give something back to others, then the Chiron energy starts working and the flow comes back into the life.
You've been listening to Feel Good Astrology with Louisa Tanner Munson, and this recording has been made possible by all you lovely supporters at Patreon. To request a personal reading with Louisa, go to www.feelgoodastrology.com.